Oh hey, it's Wes, and today it is time for a very requested video. Hopefully Godox doesn't come out with a new flash the day after I do this. It is time for the huge comparison. What is the difference between the V860 Mark III, the V1, the V1 Pro, and the V100? This one is a U. This one does not have a U. I have a video about the U versus non-U though, so check that out. We're not going to talk about that. Some would say that these are all basically the exact same thing, but with wildly different price points. Some, however, would argue they're all wildly different devices, vastly different, but obviously the truth is somewhere in between. There's going to be some obvious stuff, and there are going to be some big surprises that a lot of people don't really realize about these flashes. Number one, we're going to start out with a similarity that a lot of people get wrong. They all have a metal hot shoe. Gone are the days where Godox is shipping plastic hot shoes. Now, I want to be really clear, this was not Godox's initial choice. This was the spec provided by Sony for hot shoes that go into Sony cameras. If you're a Nikon or Canon shooter, disregard all of this. They've always been metal. Initially, they were plastic because the spec sheet provided to Godox said that they should be plastic because of all these extra pins. Then Godox updated the design and made metal ones. If you have a flash with a plastic one, you can probably check out AliExpress and buy a replacement metal shoe. So that is not a difference. Some people think it is. The only reason they think that is that these later flashes came out later, and so they came with the metal shoe from the beginning, whereas these ones were updated later on. Since we're talking about the shoe though, one difference there is, inside this Sony foot on the V100 is a daughter board that is specifically designed to manage the microscopic delays required to tune it to firing with the global shutter on the A9 III. Now, a couple caveats there. When this first came out, the firmware wasn't fantastic and it didn't do its job perfectly, so some people think that that board does nothing. However, a later revision updated the firmware in that daughter board and it works much better now. But the second caveat, however, is it is not a panacea, it is not a be-all, end-all. Yes, it will optimize your output for lining up with the A9 III, but it's not perfect. You still do get diminishing returns. The shutter speed on the A9 III, once you go above 1/8,000th of a second, is very fast. And at a lot of power levels, the V100's decay is going to be longer than the shutter speed on the A9 III. You won't necessarily get all your power anyway. Keep that in mind. It's something that nothing else has, but it's still not perfect. If you want to pick up any of these flashes, there will be links down in the description below. I'm not going to judge you. Use whatever you want, whatever works for you and your business or your hobby. Let's talk about our head angles. Godox was the first, I believe, with the V860 Mark III to have the lean back head. These all have the lean back head. And oh my goodness, I never want to use another flash that does not have a lean back head. Gone are those days. There is an obvious difference, that being the round head with the magnetic attachments. Bada bing, bada boom, you can snap whatever you want onto this flash. Yeah, you can get like mag mod accessories and snap-on accessories for a square head, but it's not everything. And however, you might have noticed that I just snapped a accessory onto the V100U. There are a lot of V100Us out there shipping with the red plastic ring that does not magnetically attach. I have a bunch of videos on that, check those out. We're not going to talk about that. Speaking of, there's a huge difference in the Fresnel lens and the zooming. So, this original V860 Mark III, like most flashes out there, it will do 20mm to 200mm of zooming. This thing zooms like crazy. And you've got your diffusion panel, you've got your bounce card. That's all cool stuff. These round flashes, they don't have that. They only zoom from 28 to 105. So if you're one of those shooters, a lot of wildlife shooters do that, some more fashion paparazzi sort of thing do this, direct flash at a distance, this is going to shoot a lot further. Even though this has more power, which we'll talk about later, if you're doing direct flash at a distance, a square flash with a 200mm zoom is still going to get you more light further out. Now, Profoto has an interesting extra Fresnel attachment that you can magnetically attach onto this that will actually give you a huge boost in power and distance, but that's not a Godox product, but that is an option. Next up is recycle time. Not a huge difference here. Most of these are about 1.5 seconds. at max power. But the max power on the V100 is higher, so it's 1.7 seconds. However, at the equivalent level of power, you're looking at a faster recycle time, so there's that. Wireless group control. These ones can control 4 groups, but if I'm doing sender on this, I can do 5 groups. That's something, I guess. Very small difference. Let's flip it around. Here's where we find a couple bigger differences. On the V1 Pro and the V100, we have the external power pack, where you can get insane amounts of battery and recycle and yada yada yada. These ones don't have that. And you have the front accessory port, which at present is just for the sub-flash. I was hoping that there'd be some other accessories, but not so much. Speaking of the front, on the V860 Mark III, you have the LED right smack in the middle here. Some people think that that is the best place for it to be. On the other hand, the LEDs are inside the heads on our round flashes. Other people think that that's the best place for it to be. Where do you think the LED should be? Anywhere. Kinda cut their losses, split the difference. There's one on the body, one on the head. Can't use them both at the same time though, you have to switch between them. Speaking of those LEDs, they are not all the same. Not even remotely. The V860 Mark III, we have a CRI of 92.4 and an R9 of 57. So if you're using it to light a subject, you're gonna get awful skin tones. But then we move to the V1, the LED in that is a CRI of 85.3 and an R9 of 20. Trash. I don't know why. Then we bump up to the V1 Pro and the V100. They seem to probably have the same LED in them. One has 97.7 CRI, 94.6. Both have 84 for the R9, so that is usable for light. You know what this video needs? More charts and graphs. I might have to pause this because I'm not going to slow down. First, we're going to look at our shot-to-shot consistency. We have a full graph of everything I've tested recently, and we will see that the V100 has the least exposure deviation of these ones that we are testing. Very low white balance deviation, decent tint deviation, very good. Then we'll slide down the chart. You can see the V1 Pro, the V1, much further down there. The sub-flash that you attach to the V100 and the V1 Pro, just the worst. I mean, you wouldn't expect it to be the best anyway, though. And next we'll do this test again, this time in high-speed sync. The V100 is still above the other ones, but they kind of sink further down the list here, with the V1 Pro having a surprising amount of shot-to-shot exposure deviation, with the V100 being just spot on white balance deviation. Next we're looking at our consistency. If we move between 1/2 power and 1/64 power, does that change our tint or white balance? As you can see, the V1 Pro is the worst for this for some reason. And just as a note, all of these measurements are taken as an average of many shots together. So this is just not one shot at a time, it's averaged. And as you can see, they all have very similar white balance to start out, but then we get some heavier deviation on the V1 Pro. They're all pretty cool, around 6500K. And then we'll quickly compare it to the whole lineup. Feel free to freeze this frame and have a closer look if you so choose. And then we'll compare them in high-speed sync. As you can see, the white balance does change significantly when you change to high-speed sync, and we get a little bit more drift as well in this circumstance. And once again, here's the whole lineup to compare to. Next up is our power. They all take the same battery form factor. This is the VB26, but they're not all the same battery that they come with. So if you buy a V1 or a V860 Mark III right now, you're probably going to get the VB26A, which is the updated version, but the V1 Pro and the V100 have the VB30. Huge advantage there, USB charging. Massive, big game changer for me. It is true, the charger that came with the original VB26A is very small, is USB chargeable, but it's just nicer to have it right in the battery. So simple, so easy to use. Love that. Now, if you remember Godox batteries from like the V860, V860 Mark II, not a great track record there. These, however, have been fantastic. I have heard very few complaints about these. I haven't had any issues myself. They seem to be much improved over the previous generation. I wouldn't worry about them at all. Speaking of that though, in these original flashes, To get the battery out, you press this button and you slide the battery out. That's simple enough. Just a slight bit different, a much looser battery. Some people complained that they thought it was too tight, so Godox changed it. Other people are complaining that it's too loose. You can bump this button too easily. There's a little retention locking here, so it doesn't just fly right out, but once it's loose, it comes out real fast. So if you're a quick changer, you'll love that. If you're a bumper, you might not love that. Another obvious difference though, of course, is our move to an LCD touchscreen. As you can see right here. How does that look on camera? Oh, wake up. Obviously, very different looks here. And there are advantages and disadvantages. Let's say I want to change the wireless channel that I'm on. The V100 has, again, an advantage and a disadvantage. If I want to change the channel on one of these, I press this button once, I change it, boom. The V100, I need to go into my wireless menu, change it here, and go back out. A little bit slower. However, if I want to sync with my transmitter, if I'm not big on the whole wireless channel mumbo jumbo and I just want it to do it for me, this has the sync button, so I can go into my transmitter on wireless, press sync here, press sync on here, boom, they're on the same channel. Easy peasy. So that part is easier, but it's not as fast as just changing it right on there. And that kind of extends to a bunch of other features on here. Changing the group, pretty easy. I press that and it comes up there. I would like to be able to do that with the channel as well, like make these icons a tiny bit bigger so I can just tap on either one of them. Changing the power level. On these, I have to press the up-down arrow, then change it. On this one, I can slide it with my finger, not very precise, or I can navigate the screen, select, and move it with the wheel. A lot of people have complaints about these wheels. They break, they don't necessarily work fantastically well, a little hard to use. All valid, totally valid. And I found a lot of people are having trouble getting used to the wheel on the V100 because they're used to having to like very delicately move the wheel on these original ones, whereas on the V100, you just put your thumb right down in there and turn it. You've got to unlearn what you learned on the original Godox flashes. Once you're used to that and just giving it the business, that's fantastic. Easy access to the zoom, that's great. Easy access to change TTL to manual. Got TCM on all of these. All right, moving right along to my own testing. You can download a product manual and see what the overheat cutoff points for these are, but that's not necessarily going to tell you everything, practically speaking. So I tested all these flashes, head-to-head, overheat torture test, to see how they do at 1/2 power every 4 seconds, both in sync and in high-speed sync. If you didn't know this already, internally the V860 Mark III and the V1 are essentially identical flashes. As such, they have essentially identical overheating performance, which is, in that test, they made it through 116 flashes within sync speed and 44 in high-speed sync. V1 Pro, the big step up there was an improvement to that, and that made it to 174 flashes in sync, 91 in high-speed sync. Over twice as many. And then, if we go to the V100, a little more complicated. If we're at 1/2 power on this, we get 155 and 93. But if I adjust this to 1/4 plus 0.5, which is the same output as these, which we'll just talk about next, this gets 183 and 93. So an even further bump, not a giant bump over the V1 Pro. If all you care about is that extra overheating resistance, the V1 Pro is already mostly getting you there. That is the elephant in the room. These are all 76 watt-second flashes. This is a 100 watt-second flash. Is that a big difference? No, it's not. But where it really does it for me is what I just talked about in the overheat resistance. Especially if you're shooting in TTL, this is going to be firing at a lower output than these are, and so it's going to last you longer, be more resistant to overheating, etc., etc. That's the big advantage. The power bump is only sometimes noticeable and useful. Which brings us to another similarity. These all bottom out at 1/256 power. I was expecting the V100 to go down to 1/512. Maybe they'll do it with a firmware update. Might not be possible to change that on the hardware level though. Speaking of power, battery life on the V1 and the V860, again very similar, 480 shots, full power shots on a charge. The V1 Pro, a little more efficient. there is something fundamentally different inside this 500 shots. V100, putting out more power, uses power faster. If you're using all of your power, 400 shots to charge. Again, if you turn that down to the same equivalent level, it's going to be about the same battery life. Fundamentally different on the inside, what is that? Well, they all have high-speed sync. That's fantastic. But the V1 Pro and the V100 have a new version of high-speed sync that we only see in just a few flashes. We also see it in the V480, but that's all I found so far. Even Godox's new big flashes like the 8600 BM2, they don't have it. That is the ability to do high-speed sync with electronic first curtain shutter on. I think this also affects flashes that had some banding issues that only have electronic shutters like the Z8, Z9. You don't have to worry about it. And you only get that on these two. One more obvious difference is they get heavier. Let's start out. V860 Mark III, 530 grams. V1, also 530 grams. I don't know, it feels a little heavier in my hand. Maybe it's more top heavy. Then we go Pro, 580 grams. And then V100, 619 grams. Getting a little beefy. But how does that compare to other things? The Profoto A10 is 560 grams, so fairly close to the V1 Pro. If you get the Sony HVL F60RM2, 563 grams. The Westcott FJ80 Mark II-M, 600 grams. A lot of these big flashes are pretty heavy. That's just the way of things. But if you don't like extra weight, you might not want to upgrade all the way up the scale here. The other thing we're upgrading, of course, is the price. Starting with the V860 Mark III, $230 US. V1, 260, just a small update. It used to be more expensive. They brought it down a bit when the V1 Pro came out, $330. Then the V100, $350. This is tough. And I keep going back and forth on this and what it's worth. Because it all makes sense, ultimately. Before they dropped the price a bit on the V1, it made less sense, but you get a little bit more, you pay a little bit more from the V860 to the V1. That's fine. But there is such a huge price difference going up to the V1 Pro. It's a big jump, but you get that better electronic first curtain shutter, HSS compatibility, you get much faster shooting because you get the better recycle time, and then you pay just a little bit more and you get this ultra-modern, easy-to-use interface V100. So that's tough. There's a big gap between these. What do I recommend? Well, if you're not a professional photographer, and I hate the word professional photographer, but if you're not making money on photography, if that isn't your bread and butter, if you're not doing events where you absolutely cannot fail, there isn't much reason for you to go all the way up market for this. But if you are doing mission critical stuff, if you are doing stuff where you cannot fail, you cannot have things overheat on you, obviously you're going to want the stuff that works more reliably. And that is these ones. What do you think about the differences? What is your favorite Godox flash? Or do you just want to go with something that's AA battery powered? Or do you want to go with something smaller, like the V480? It's pretty great. I have a review coming out on this pretty soon. I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, but not for the reasons you think. So get subscribed. If you want to pick up any of these flashes, there will be links down in the description below. I'm not going to judge you. Use whatever you want, whatever works for you and your business or your hobby. Which one did I choose? Well, I am a working photographer, a wedding photographer. All of my money comes from photography, not this YouTube channel. And so, choices have been made. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below. But, till next time, go take some photos.